of schools in the context of our pandemic has been a linchpin for getting our economy back on track and supporting families, communities, and most importantly, our students in getting back on with their learning processes. And so at this point, we're proud to say that for over a month now, Maine schools have been in session and have been perpetuating that daily miracle that is public education. You may notice that the green, yellow, and so far not yet red, which is lovely, map of our state shows mostly green counties. And yet, in most cases, you're probably noticing that there are hybrid schedules. In other words, some of those go every other day, like cohort A is in the building, and then the following day, cohort B is in the building, having their in-person education, and then that's augmented with remote days during the alternating times. And you may get questions from your constituents regarding, why is this a thing when we have green? Green says you can be in person. But we've learned from our partners at the CDC here in Maine, and DHHS, that green in a pandemic is different from just like run straight ahead. In fact, in even a green county, all schools must observe the 6 requirements that were determined as the health and safety requirements for having in-person education. Those are located on our website, and we'll provide you with links if you need to get to them. But the one that essentially comes into play here is the spacing. Having students between 3 and 6 feet apart throughout the day makes it impossible for most schools, based on their square footage and their design and their capacity. Most schools in our state can't fit everybody in the building at the same time safely while following those requirements. And so it is essentially a function of spacing that has caused the hybrid schedules, if that's helpful for you as you answer questions. In general, how's it going in the schools? Well, I would say, with over 183,000 kids and students and 20 to 30,000 staff members throughout the state, most of them, as we speak right now, are engaged in education. And I think that that is something we should all be extremely proud of. We know that there also are in the news every other day or so, there's a case here or there's a case there, even an outbreak here or there. And I think it's important to note that while those catch our attention and can feel like an overwhelming steady drip of here's another one and another, the truth is when you zoom out and look at the big picture, our schools are doing miraculously well. At the very beginning of the school year, we were inundated at the department with letters and emails and accounts from the field regarding the experience of students reuniting with their teachers. Teachers were so joyful to be back with their kids. Students were so joyful to be back with their peers and back with their teachers and to re-engage in the learning process. From certain teacher accounts, we hear that after a month of this now, with being hypervigilant, being very careful, the intricate choreography even of a bathroom pass in this context has been taking a toll. And we hear constantly people saying it feels more like March than like October in the school settings. That said, we also hear, and often, I just would like to point out, and I imagine it's the same for you as legislators, here at the state, we don't have the perfectly happy people calling us to say, hey, so far so good, things are great. We instead hear from the people who are struggling the hardest. And I assume that that would be the case when you receive calls and questions from the field and from the public. In the case of some teachers, which we've had to actually overtly ask for this information, this isn't, like I said, coming to us independently, but when we ask teachers in general how it's going, they're saying that they're noticing that with the hybrid model and fewer students in front of them each day, they took far less time to get to know their students and their learning styles, to conduct formative assessments to see where each child is on the continuum of learning and be able to get moving forward with them. And that they've actually been able to successfully move through more content and more skills than they typically would have by this time in a regular school year. And we've asked them to pay close attention to the results of those formative assessments and to carefully catalog the anecdotes and the learning that they see, because knowing how resilient the developing child brain is, we predict that we're going to see exponential growth in their academic and in their social, emotional, and behavioral skills this year. So we're encouraged in many ways. But again, we do have to say it has been an exhausting time for schools and for school leaders and for district leaders. I'm going to hand it over to Dan Chuhta, who's our Deputy Commissioner at the department.
Thank you, Commissioner. Good morning, everyone. I am Dan Chuhta, Deputy Commissioner, and thank you for joining us this morning. I'm pleased that you're here. And so this shows you a glimpse into what some schools look like these days, which are a little bit different than school pictures from the past. But it also, I think, is a nice introduction to some of the innovative pieces that are going on in schools, and just some of the different ways that students are learning, and teachers are helping that learning to be accomplished, maybe in a little bit different way. So whether it's through music, as you see there, masked up and distance. In some cases, things are happening outside, as you can see on the bottom. Schools have come up with creative ways to have outdoor opportunities for students to learn outside. But you also see up in the top right-hand corner that some of our programs like career and technical education have also found creative ways to accomplish the learning, just in slightly different ways. So looks a little different, feels a little different. I can vouch for the same for my own two kids, who are thrilled to be able to be in school for some amount of time during the week. That it's felt a little bit different, but the routines have been established, and kids are very resilient and can learn those quickly and adapt and be successful with that. So as the Commissioner has mentioned, the learning models are varied depending on what local needs are and what the creative ideas are that educators have come up with. As you've probably heard, some are doing in-person instruction, some are doing online learning, some are doing both at the same time. We have situations where half of the class may be home, but they're able to be videoed into the classroom. So lots of different ways that educators are accomplishing the learning during the day while staying safe. As I mentioned, the music and arts programs have also found creative ways. Different instruments call for different precautions, as we know, but spacing, whether it's inside or in some cases outside, music and arts programs have been able to continue successfully, with some challenges, but successfully, and including remote opportunities for them as well. A couple pieces to highlight for you. Moose is our main online opportunities for sustained education. It's an online platform that we have made available to schools and the public this fall. We had between 300 and 400 educators from across the state who were very willing to work with us to design the modules and interdisciplinary opportunities for students to continue learning. Those are being utilized in lots of different ways, whether it's supplementing what's happening at schools, or it's providing support for families while they're at home in the learning. But Moose has been successful, and those educators are continuing to build out the modules to complete the school year. SEL for me is an acronym for social emotional learning. That is a platform online again, and will provide learning opportunities for students at all of the grade levels in social emotional learning. Again, those are pieces that help students develop healthy relationships and positive skills in order to persevere and be resilient, particularly in light of some of the challenging times that we're in, but even in the course of normal interactions with each other. We're looking forward to the release of SEL for me when that's just about ready to help support social emotional learning. And then we continue the great success that the department has had in offering early college options, often referred to as aspirations. The amount of investment that we put into this program is immense, and we have students that have year after year continued to take advantage of this opportunity. it's a good partnership between us and the university, as well as community college system. We have regular and ongoing collaboration with them. And we have students even now during the opportunities for hybrid to even take additional opportunities to take those courses where they may not have had the opportunity to do so before. So this is very healthy. And the number of students that are taking advantage of this opportunity continues to grow. So we see great success. And not only that, but the university and community college are reporting to us that students aren't just taking the courses, but they're actually being very successful in their credit bearing success in this as well. And upwards of 90% of students in the university courses are receiving credit for their course participation. And it's upwards of 85% for the community college as well. So that's a great program that has been successful previous to COVID and now is even more vital during this period. Child nutrition. So this was a bright spot for us back in the spring. We recognized early on, besides connectivity, that nutrition was an essential piece that was going to be necessary for families to be healthy and well, to continue learning. And our superheroes from child nutrition and transportation were there, getting meals out to families. And in our partnership with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, seeking waivers in order to extend these opportunities and flexibilities. The good news is that earlier in the summer, we learned that these waivers would be extended for at least part of the school year. And just very recently, we were pleased to learn that the waivers have been extended now through the end of the school year. So this means that regardless of whether students are in a hybrid situation or full remote, our child nutrition programs can continue to provide meals, in some cases for multiple days at a time, in order to ensure that students have the nutrition that they need to stay healthy. So this has been a highlight for us, something that's proving to be critical for our school communities, and with the flexibilities that we've received from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, will continue through the rest of the school year, which is great news.
And so many of you remember that we, throughout the spring and into the summer, worked with many stakeholder groups across the entire span, student groups and parent groups and all of the various participants in public education. And even also we had private education partners in there with us. We created a framework for returning that includes a set of health and safety guidelines, some of which are requirements, and some of which are strong recommendations. Those requirements and recommendations were identified by a team of community-based team, by the way, who volunteer their expertise. And they are epidemiologists and researchers and doctors and public health experts. And they have been the team that's created the benchmarks and safety guidelines for all of the reopening activities and across the state. And they have, again, they've done this also for schools. They also worked with, famously, as you probably know, the Department of Education does not have any statutory authority over athletic programs and extracurricular programs, but we did take the opportunity to participate with MPA and with this team of public health officials and experts to help MPA to bring their guidelines for health and safety of students participating in athletics in line with the community-based sports guidelines that already exist. And we intend to be working with them again in the near future with respect to the outlook for winter athletics. We have yet to have that meeting, but we are planning to do so soon. Again, our role is, we've been delighted to be able to participate and maybe insert ourselves. However, we don't have the authority to, other than ensuring that schools are adhering to the guidelines and executive orders that do exist. You know that we have worked with schools across the state to require of them some minimum expectations in the event that remote learning has to take place. In some places it's happening today, as a matter of fact, and that remote learning could be every other day as part of a hybrid, or it could be a short temporary span of time during which a school or part of a school has to go remote due to a quarantine, a case that maybe has happened in a school setting. So in that event, the minimum expectations we didn't have in place in the spring. And as you remember, there were very uneven results. There were uneven experiences for students and families when we went suddenly remote in March. And we learned a lot from that experience. And we have taken dramatic steps to ensure that it doesn't happen again. If you'd like the whole list, I won't go through it right now, but if you'd like to take a look at the list, you can link it or link to it from our website. It is within the framework. It's section 4 of the framework for reopening. That contains the bare minimum that families and communities can expect from school settings when there is a remote learning situation. So if that's of help, we wanted you to know that that exists. Also, our school safety center has been working across the state to help districts with everything from emergency management planning to a development of a new, we're piloting a risk assessment program with 3 schools or districts right now, and we hope to generalize that out across the state soon. But they were also tremendously helpful in obtaining PPE for all of the districts in our state, and for providing just in general safety guidelines and support and partnering. They are basically our liaison with MEMA and other folks at CDC. The other thing I thought I'd mention is that schools, if you're wondering, are safe, as it turns out. By and large, schools in Maine and schools across the nation are trending, I guess, safer than the larger community. So a recent article in the Atlantic kind of highlights that, but the statistics that they brag about saying, look how safe schools are, and they point to a 0.15 positivity rate for people in school settings as compared with a much larger rate for those who are not involved in school settings. And we looked at that here in Maine, and it turns out that in Maine, we are right now at far lower than that, maybe a third of that rate in our schools. And it amounts to 5 out of every 10,000 people are positive with COVID who are affiliated with a school here, as compared with 6.7 people per 10,000 who are not. And so if that data continues to trend in such a way, it would be safe to say that right now, those who are attending schools are safer than they are perhaps in the community. It might be a leap, and again, we're early on in it, but I just would like to point out that that's what the data is currently telling us. On our website, the main DOE website, you'll notice that we have repackaged in such a way as to make it accessible as possible to all people in the community, and especially, of course, to the field who need to quickly access information in the event that they're preparing for or preventing or responding to COVID-19 concerns, cases, outbreaks. Our COVID-19 toolkit provides a number of links that can get you where you want to go quickly so that you can find the information that might be helpful to you. It links to of course, to our framework and to the standard operating procedures that are followed by schools across the state when they need to work with contact tracers in the event of a COVID situation. I probably have said this before, but I think it bears repeating that our web resources, because in addition to these response, health, and safety pieces, we have a website that is rich with opportunities for families, for students, and please share this with the people who reach out to you. Students and families and educators and school leaders can connect on a very regular basis with live consultants at the state in a variety of content areas, also with respect to technology and remote learning. And we have been highlighted in the New York Times and in PBS NewsHour as an exemplary resource for education when it comes to responding to the COVID-19 emergency.
This is Dan again. So just some examples of the outreach and resources that we have been able to provide, often in partnership with others to the field. So the first is a Warmline, which is modeled after a hotline essentially that was made available for frontline healthcare workers across the state, supported by DHHS. And we have partnered with them now to provide a Warmline for educators as well. So as I'm sure you can imagine, and we've described, school is very different in many ways, which often brings with it a lot of additional responsibilities and, quite frankly, work, a lot of additional work for many people. And that's in every role of the school. You know, across the board, people are overwhelmed with what they have going on at this point. So this is an opportunity for educators to call. The MEA retired organization stepped up to the plate and was willing to help with this. So they are former educators who have been trained in some response techniques for when calls come in. And so somebody who's in a school that just needs somebody to talk with can call up, and they have somebody on the other end of the line who is also has kind of walked in their shoes to some degree and can talk with them about being in schools and those feelings of being overwhelmed. So that's a great resource. That hasn't been up for very long, but we were pleased to partner with DHHS and the MEA Retired to make that available. For many places, we know that staffing shortages is a concern. And so there are a couple different examples here and ways in which that we have partnered with others to help create opportunities to bring staffing to schools. So the first that's listed there is the learning facilitators, and we enlisted the support of Eastern Maine Community College. The idea behind a learning facilitator is that for a couple different reasons, the teacher of the classroom may actually be remote, while kids could be in the class. And so the idea behind the facilitator is that they may or may not be somebody who is in an education program but just hasn't quite graduated yet, or someone else who has had other roles that are interested in facilitating the in-person piece while the teacher is actually remoting into the classroom. So there's a partnership between the facilitator and the teacher to support the learning that's going on in potentially two different locations. We also know that we had a driver shortage before the pandemic. And so again, the community college system has partnered with us as we reached out to them to see if they could support us with this. And they are providing commercial driver license CDL training to increase our number of drivers that are available for school units. And the last piece that I would mention is as far as supporting the educator staffing is that we have, through an executive order, some certification flexibilities to, again, enable folks to become certified and be supportive of classrooms, whether they're coming from another state or they're not quite finished with their programming. And an educator preparation program, they are able to apply for these flexibilities and certification. And we're hearing that is being very facilitative of helping individuals working in schools. Many of these ideas and partnerships are supported by our ongoing conversations with educational leaders across the state. On a weekly basis. At different stages through the pandemic, it was actually more than weekly, and sometimes it was 2 and 3 times a week. We were meeting with our educator stakeholder groups, the Teachers Association, principals, superintendents, special education leaders, curriculum leaders. At this stage of the game, we are at weekly meetings, and those partnerships have been critical in problem solving, idea generation, In many ways, this has been an opportunity for us to continue to build trust among those organizations so that when challenges do arise, whether it's across the state challenge or it may even be at just one particular school unit, we have these partnerships and then we can reach out to be supportive. So that's ongoing and has been critical to the success that we're able to achieve. And finally, GEER, the Governor's Emergency Education Relief Funding, which is part of the federal funding opportunities that we have had. I know that we've mentioned to you before that we use GEER funding to provide hotspots and devices. We are up to 8 surveys now at this point that we have, again, asked to ensure that we are meeting the needs that are expressed through those surveys for families that may not have connections at home, so that students have devices and can accomplish that remote learning as they're needing to. And that extension was good news because the contracts and services were only going to be available for 6 months, and those were extended to be throughout the school year so that there won't be an interruption midway through the year. Those devices will have coverage now through the end of the school year, which is good news. So the needs continue, that's for sure. That universal access to internet is still something that we're hearing, and we know that cell service is not in every square inch of our state, and so that we're also exploring some opportunities, again, through the use of some federal funds to look at the expansion of some broadband opportunities. It's a bit of a patchwork, as you probably already know, as far as connectivity is concerned across the state. But we also recognize the importance of students being able to connect with their school and their teacher through technology. And so we're looking at other ways to expand that. That was a concern, of course, that we had before the pandemic, and it's been highlighted now. So we can continue that work to achieve universal access for students. Obviously, the guidelines are still there in place. Our 6 requirements for in-person instruction, they're there to keep everyone safe, both students and staff. And we're seeing overall very good support of those pieces, whether it's through face coverings or the distancing, just to name a few of those. But really, it's the community support that's necessary in order to make that very successful. And we've had students really step up to the plate and asking their communities for their support so that they can continue the in-person instruction in the schools because of the value that they see themselves as students in that. And finally, just the fact that people are overwhelmed. And so the more that we as educational leaders and those of us that are interested in the success of schools can share with others who may not see all those examples and opportunities to share that good news, that they need our kindness and they need us to continue to be collaborative. And the more that we can share the good news that's happening, because of course, sometimes folks only hear the not so good news, but the more that we are collective in our support of schools, they'll appreciate that. But I think, you know, the success long-term will be prolonged if we're able to collaborate on that sharing. So we've got great examples. If you need some, we can give you some additional examples of how things are really working well and the creativity that's gotten it to that point.
What a great segue, Dan, because I just wanted to add a couple more things in there that we are working very hard to continue while managing an emergency. We are trying so hard to celebrate the amazing work that's being done in classrooms and schools. We just last week celebrated both Maine's Teacher of the Year and the CTE Teacher of the Year at 2 separate events in the same week, which was just so inspirational. And we learned that if you remember the learning space, that was our partnership with Maine Public and Educate Maine. We had those videos that were created by Maine teachers, sorry about that, created by Maine teachers and featured on Maine Public Broadcasting Network, available to all students who were home with remote learning last spring in grades 3 to 5. Those are wonderful in their archive if you want to check them out. We just learned that they are finalists. This project has Maine Public is now a finalist, down to the final 5, including San Francisco, Detroit, like big deal people. I mean, it's this project is right up there in the running for a big national award, which I think is very exciting. And finally, we're trying to support everyone associated with Maine education, involve them in innovative design thinking, innovation engineering, and similar types of professional development. And that is offered through the $17 million federal grant that was won by our innovation team at the department. And it will also allow schools to be piloting more innovative approaches to hybrid, to remote learning. And I think you're going to see a lot of good things to come. And I guess in general, I want to thank you all, because I know you're on the front lines of hearing some of the harder situations, and we have saved our second half hour for you to ask questions of us. And so I think Kelly's going to be getting those questions, and people will raise their hand. I'm not going to tell you how to do it. It's going to happen. Here we go.
So at this point in the briefing, we would like to invite you to raise your hand. We'll take your questions in the order in which they're received. We'll ask you to unmute yourself and ask the question directly to Commissioner Makin and Deputy Commissioner Chuhta. There was one member of the legislature that asked us to share a question on their behalf. They had to attend another meeting. That question, Commissioner Makin, was regarding enrollment counts and subsidy in future years. Could you just give an update on where we are with that decision and what is to come in the future?
Sure. Yes. So the enrollment counts, today is the deadline by which the superintendents will have certified and submitted their enrollment data. And so we'll have some more information coming very soon on where that landed. Interestingly, we're hearing by and large that superintendents feel that there are far more people who have registered to homeschool this year, and they expect smaller numbers. As you know, that would impact, of course, their subsidy calculation, if that is in fact the case. We also have learned contributing to that is a specific potential lack of pre-K students and kindergarten students, because families are hesitant to have this be the initial experience their child has with education. And so we're predicting a far lower number potentially there, and then an explosion perhaps next year or the following year where these kids all do come in quickly. We are following trends in New England and across the nation in terms of how the state funding and the per pupil based formulas are responding to this. Here in Maine, we also have some strange situations. For example, in Carabasset, which has not a public school of its own, and they tuition as an SAU their students to other schools in the area. They have doubled or maybe tripled at this point their student enrollment, and thereby their need to tuition far more students than they had ever planned or budgeted for. And that is because families from other states see Maine as a safe and healthy place to be, and they have moved into their condos at Sugarloaf from other places. We're also hearing that somewhere, or some places up in the county, home sales are through the roof, and the values of those homes are also increasing. And so a sweeping approach, or deciding too quickly how we're going to manage the enrollment and subsidy connection, to decide any of that prematurely, I think would be not prudent. And so we're exploring every option. We're looking at the numbers carefully. We're eager to see what happens with this October 1 enrollment, and what plans districts might have to reach out to, in the case that there are kids who are missing. They haven't shown up at school and they haven't registered as homeschoolers. We know that that's a thing every year. I think this is a year in particular where we're encouraging and supporting schools in reaching out to those families repeatedly to make sure that they recognize that school can be a very safe place for their child. And but we don't have a decision ready for you today, and I can just tell you that we are giving deep consideration to all aspects of this question.
Thank you, Commissioner. The next question is from Representative Sampson.
I'm unmuted now, but I'm going off video because I don't have bandwidth here, so I'm disappearing on you. So thank you. So I have a couple of questions. There's more, we don't need to have a discussion about it necessarily. I was just wondering, it's more of an action item. And then I have a question. So the first thing is, Commissioner, you mentioned all of the teachers who helped with the Moose platform. Is it possible to get a list of who they were, who they are? That would be wonderful. I'd really like to see that.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, we don't need to have a long discussion about it. It's more just real quick questions here. The charter school report that was supposed to be done this past winter, I'm assuming it's been completed. Is that correct? Is that something we could get before us?
Yes, I believe it's linked on our website, and Jess Nixon, if she's on here with us, can confirm. And if it isn't, we'll link it right away.
Okay, super awesome. Thank you. And then the last question I have was pertaining to, the safety of the schools. And there's just a bit of data that I would be very, very interested in. And I don't know, I know it's not really the department's responsibility, but maybe you guys can ask nicely for this information. How many of these kids that are tested, because I've run into a number of students as I've been going out and talking to people who have down here, obviously I'm in York County, a hot spot. And these kids, they're now home, kids have been quarantined, all of that. How many of those children that have been tested are asymptomatic? How many are symptomatic? That has to be a data point, and I'm wondering if that's something that we could get a hold of.
So that is not data that we collect at the Department of Education, but would be a possible question for the CDC. And we're happy to reach out to see if they do a disaggregation of the positivity rates of tested. I think what you're saying is, what's the positivity rate of kids who are tested in school settings? And I will reach out and see if that is that is
specifically.
Look at that, Kelly DeVoe has
actually symptomatic, or whether they are measuring asymptomatic. I'd like to know that, because that really ties into that article you were talking about, and I would just be curious as to what we're seeing here in Maine.
Okay, great. And please check the chat for a link that Kelly DeVoe has provided to the Maine CDC, where you may be able to get some of those answers.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
At this time, I do not see any other hands raised, Commissioner, but I want to give it at least another minute or so.
Actually, it's Allison Hepler. I don't know how to raise my hand. And I'm here. Welcome to University of Maine at Farmington, where I'm in my office. I have a question about whether, to what, and this is probably a big sweeping question, but to what do you attribute how hard it is for at least the school district in my area to go from a hybrid to in-class learning? And I imagine there are many reasons, but I was wondering if there's a theme. And then, are you making recommendations for what they can use that CARES money for? For instance, here in Farmington, they've made a big investment in technology, so we can have Zoom students as well as live students, or hiring new people. Thanks.
Sure. So that was the first is we attribute the challenge of getting from hybrid to fully in person specifically to the required distancing. It's literally a matter of space. And so the schools that are large and have large classrooms and smaller numbers of students, which do exist in the state, they're able to get their kids in every day together. Those who have smaller classrooms and larger student populations are unable to do so, just physically, logistically due to that. The question about when will those restrictions be lifted, that is a question that I know that community-based team of epidemiologists and scientists and doctors, that is something that they are examining on a very regular basis. They continue to look at emerging and very recent research on a regular basis. And as soon as it's safe to ratchet that back, we will hear that from them. And the other piece, I'm sorry, what was just the keyword on that? No.
Yeah.
Sorry, they were totally unrelated.
Yeah, what was, are you recommending, I know there was some additional CARES money.
Yeah, got it. Okay, right. So the CRF funds, we gave examples based on what we heard. Really, we heard from the field. So it's a feedback loop in a sense, because hearing from the field that their concerns were regarding staffing, regarding technology, regarding connectivity of people to access technology, regarding air quality and ventilation systems and other facilities type upgrades that would make safe places for schools, regarding needing more buses for the same exact reasons, wanting to space children as far apart as possible. So those were things we heard from the field and that we put into as examples into our application. It was not a list that should be definitive or specific or finite. They were all intended to be examples. And those tend to be the highest trending expenditures. But there are unique and different needs in every, as you know, in every district. And we tried to make this funding as flexible as possible. Hiring people, it's a tricky one because you can't hire anybody past December 30th using CRF funding unless we see some kind of activity from Congress and the White House that would allow more flexibility with respect to the use of those funds. For a while, I was holding out great hope. I don't know what I think right now, so I can't predict. Representative Farnsworth. Chelsea, some people are raising their actual hand on the screen.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm very interested in the special education issues. And have you been working with families in order to try and improve the support systems that are going to be absolutely necessary given special education issues around personal learning experiences?
Yes, and of course, it has been straight on right from the very beginning, one of our top concerns and priorities. We've been working with the field, providing guidance on best practices and how to work with students when and if the necessity of remote or hybrid learning occurs. And we have also held very regular meetings with special education directors and with families and family representative groups. I would ask Erin Frazier to maybe fill in a couple of the details, as she is our director of special services and has been the front lines of this work.
Yeah, right now we're doing kind of a multi-tiered approach to technical assistance to the field. One to the administrators who support and oversee special education, another to the teaching staff, and then another to our special purpose private schools because they have kind of a unique context sometimes. So we've been providing that technical assistance. We're also coming out with professional development to work remotely and to support students in special education. And we also collaborate with parent groups, Maine Parent Federation. I've done a training for that group. And so we keep very connected. We also take a lot of calls from parents daily to just try to understand how to support the district and the parent in kind of making sure that they're getting the support that they need and is necessary for the child.
Are you getting any feedback from the parents in terms of their feelings about the quality of the support?
Well, I mean, we take a lot of concern calls. I do get some feedback from parents occasionally around just, special education teachers going above and beyond in terms of communication and support. Things are really different depending on the district, and I think everybody's doing their best to work and support, especially the students that are not able to access remote instruction. which is not all special education students. So we're really focusing on those kids to try to make sure that they're getting what they need. So yeah, we are definitely working to try to support and give strategies, ideas, and technical assistance around how to do that in the hybrid situation that we're all in.
Senator Millett, we'd like to invite you to unmute and ask your question next.
Great, thank you, Chelsea. Love to hear an update on how the, I think it was like roughly 25 million CRF grant program for out of school time, either for daycare providers or YMCAs, et cetera. How many people have been approved? How much money has been used? How much remains? That would be great. Thanks.
Sure, Senator, I can respond to that. So we did have part of our CRF package available to school units. It was 25 million total. We have just under 50 school units applied. This was more or less a competitive approach versus the other CRF packages, which were allocated out to school units. So again, just about 50 applied and were awarded funding. And again, this was, as you described, more or less not all childcare needs necessarily. It was really to provide care. In some cases, we were calling it day programming because it was filling the gap between the before care and the after care that families needed at times when typically they would be at school. We saw lots of partnerships. I would say the majority of those applications had partnerships. We were encouraging that just because there are community organizations, as you suggested, the Y and others that have this as part of their regular operations, and we're able to partner with SAUs to make this happen. It was around 10 million total awarding of those applications. And it ranged everything from, again, space to contracted services with agencies. The materials and safety supplies that were necessary were all part of what those applications were put out for. So that was well received, I think, as far as, you know, the interest that was there for families to have that care and the SAUs that were able to get something up. Again, one kind of challenge with CRF in general is that December 30th date where the funds have to be used by then. So that was something I think that may have limited some of the application only because it was only going to cover a couple months. But we know that some have been able to utilize other funds to continue that support after the 12/30 CRF deadline comes.
And I think you might have said there are close to 5,000 students who will be served by these programs across the state.
I didn't say that, so glad you added.
Yeah.
So just to be clear, the biggest block or hurdle for districts, because I mean, 5,000 students is great, but we've got a lot more out there and a lot of families who probably could use that support. The biggest hurdle you're seeing is just the fact that the way Treasury Department, the U.S. Treasury Department has interpreted the CARES Act laws that where I struggle is the funds have to be expended by the end of December, but the services can only go to the end, whatever it's covering can only be to the end of December as well. Is that
That's
correct?
correct.
Infuriating. Thank you.
So we would ask for your partnership and continued advocacy to our congressional delegation to work on possibly extending out that deadline. Commissioner Makin, as well as the governor's office, have had those conversations. And I know many of you have also reached out on our behalf, and we greatly appreciate that. I know that you're all very busy. I thank you so much for joining us today. If there are more questions, we will stay on until the end of the hour. But if not, we hope to see you again soon. And we thank you for all the hard work you're doing for our students.